Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Ellis Pierce. This is a US political analysis where I'm going to be talking you through what's been going on with regard to Donald Trump and Canada. The Premier of Ontario, a province in Canada, recently released an advert that used Ronald Reagan's words, a recording of his voice and words when he made a speech, I think in 1987, that was advocating against tariffs and for free trade. In a sort of marketing campaign against the Trump administration's stance on international trade and tariffs against Canada, for example, amongst tariffs against all sorts of other nations. Ford was trying to make the case that Canada should stand strong and these tariffs are unjustified. And then Trump has hereby, in an unhinged fashion, then stopped all trade negotiations with Canada and has now increased tariffs by a further 10% and has either lied outright about this advert or really doesn't know what he's talking about. None of this looks good for Donald Trump. So let's get into it in a little bit more detail. So let's go to the advert. We're not going to play it all, but I'll just give you a flavor of what it was. I did play this to you the other day.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars.
So on and so forth. None of this is remotely controversial, and it is indeed what he said, and we'll come to that a little bit later. So the initial response from Donald Trump, and it can be summed up like this: Ontario made me mad, so I'm going to raise taxes on Americans. That's certainly a thing. So Donald Trump said the Ronald Reagan Foundation has just announced that Canada has fraudulently used an advertisement, which is fake, all caps there, featuring Ronald Reagan speaking negatively about tariffs. Now, as an aside, that wasn't fake and it's not fraudulent. So this is a false claim. He's either lying or doesn't know what he's talking about. To continue, the ad was for $75,000. They did this to interfere with a decision of the US Supreme Court and other courts. Tariffs, all caps for this lot. Tariffs are very important to the national security and economy of the USA. Based on their egregious behavior, all trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President DJT. So and some people have argued that actually there are other things going on under the bonnet with regard to why Trump has stopped negotiations with Canada. But he's telling you, I watched this advert, it was fraudulent, it was fake, therefore we are ending trade negotiations with Canada. Now, if it's not true that the advert is fake or fraudulent, then he's ended trade negotiations with Canada for erroneous reasons. That should be just hugely condemning of Donald Trump. But he seems to get away with it all of the time. Now, here we have Face the Nation, a news show in the US.
I want to ask you about what the president just announced in regard to Canada. Today, the president said he wants to raise tariffs on Mexico. Yesterday, he said he's going to raise tariffs on Canada by 10%.
So then there's this further raising of tariffs on Canada by 10%. We are going to look into that in a second, exactly what he said. But this is asking, I think, Scott Percent, what is going on here?
He blames what he called a fraudulent ad that featured Ronald Reagan advocating for free trade. It was put up by the province of Ontario. Is this ad really the issue here, or is it just a tactic in this negotiation? Does the president want the USMCA free trade deal renegotiated, or is he looking to do two separate deals, one with Canada, one with Mexico?
Well, a lot of questions there, Margaret, but let's go to the first one. I've read that the province of Ontario is spending up to $75 million on these advertisements.
Trump says 75,000 in his post. So again, if it's 75 million, Trump's got that wrong as well.
And it's propaganda coming across our border, to decry the tariffs. So the premier of Ontario seems to have come off the rails a little.
I don't know that you can say it's coming off the rails when Ontario is being hit by tariffs by the United States. And Ontario retaliates by saying your own former president that everyone seems to love in your party was on record saying that this is a really bad idea. You are hurting us. It's a bad idea. It hurts your own consumer. Here is the evidence that that is so from your own, or here is the argument from your own beloved Ronald Reagan. I don't think that's going off the rails. So Scott Bessent is being, I think, propagandistic himself here.
He has taken the ads down, but what's the purpose of that other than to try to sway U.S. public opinion? We've seen
well, yeah, it is to sway U.S. public opinion. Absolutely right. In favor of the U.S. population.
I'm sure you at your network have decried election interference. Well, this is interference in U.S. sovereign matters.
And I do understand that argument, but is merely using a speech from Ronald Reagan. This advert is a pro-American, American flags, American workers, and an argument for the American worker that tariffs will hurt the American worker using the words of Ronald Reagan.
But is it really the premise for damaging negotiations with a top trading partner?
Well, it's clearly damaged our relationship with the most populous province in Canada.
Not really an answer. Okay, so what did Trump say in his unhinged, I think, statement here? Canada was caught red-handed putting up a fraudulent advertisement on Ronald Reagan's speech on tariffs. So that first sentence is entirely incorrect. In fact, when you see this on Twitter, it is accompanied with a community note saying that this is not correct and giving you the URLs, the links for the Reagan speeches and I think it is, other Reagan repositories. So he continues, the Reagan Foundation said that they, quote, created an ad campaign using selective audio and video of President Ronald Reagan. The ad misrepresents the presidential radio address. Now, they did use selective audio, as in the whole transcript of that speech. They don't run it contiguously. So what is said in that advert is like, we're going to take this bit, and this bit, because actually that's all that we need. We don't need the whole lot. But it's not disingenuous, and it's definitely not misrepresenting the address. In fact, the address is worse for Trump, is worse for Trump's policy agenda than the selective audio that the Ontario advert took, because actually the longer speech just goes to town even more on such a tariff approach. Anyway, Trump continues and, quote, did not seek nor receive permission to use and edit the remarks. The Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute is reviewing its legal options in this matter. Now, I don't know whether that would be coming from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation or whether that would be Trump and his team and the administration putting pressure on them to look into legal options in this matter. There should be no legal options in this matter. He said that, and it was used in an advert. So this is back to Trump's words. The sole purpose of this all caps fraud, it's not fraud, was Canada's hope that the United States Supreme Court will come to their rescue on tariffs and that they have used for years to hurt the United States. Now, the United States is able to defend itself against high and overbearing Canadian tariffs and those from the rest of the world as well. Ronald Reagan loved tariffs for purposes of national security and the economy. But Canada said he didn't. Their advertisement was to be taken down immediately, but they let it run last night during the World Series. That was it, knowing that it was a fraud because of their serious misrepresentation of the facts and hostile act, I am increasing the tariff on Canada by 10% over and above what they are paying now. Thank you for your attention to this matter. This is nothing but an example of Donald Trump being a bully. Donald Trump is a bully, and the United States, as a result of having Trump at the head of the administration, is a bullying nation. This is what they're doing around the world, is they're bullying people with tariffs to capitulate to their demands. And that's it. They are the bully in the playground, going around and nicking people's lunch money. And then when you put up a fight against them, they punch you even harder. And they're just using their brute force to grind everyone else down. It is absolutely, that's what I believe it to be. Now, let's listen to at least some of Ronald Reagan. Now, is this a fraud? Is it fraudulent? Is it fake? So remember, initially, he said fraudulently used an advert, which is fake. So fake means, it didn't happen. That's how I would understand fake here. But as this source says, Donald Trump is an incompetent POS that had to pay people to take his tests at school, and it shows. Reagan did a damn speech on tariffs. There are literally videos of it everywhere. Real presidents used to actually talk with the people, not at them, with the people, not at them. Every word in that ad was from Reagan's speech. Here's the entire 5-minute speech from April 1987.
Mr. Nakasone of Japan will be visiting me here at the White House next week. It's an important visit because while I expect to take up our relations with our good friend Japan, which overall remain excellent, recent disagreements between our two countries on the issue of trade will also be high on our agenda. As perhaps you've heard, last week I placed new duties on some Japanese products in response to Japan's inability to enforce their trade agreement with us on electronic devices called semiconductors. Now, imposing such tariffs or trade barriers and restrictions of any kind are steps that I am loath to take. And in a moment, I'll mention the sound economic reasons for this.
So what you've got to understand from this is that, yeah, he was putting some tariffs on, but saying, I really don't like doing this. And it's strategic tariffs against them for semiconductors because of X, Y, and Z. So there's a particular historical context to Ronald Reagan putting tariffs on. But then he goes on to say, but tariffs suck, and this is why they suck.
That over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. But the Japanese semiconductors were a special case. We had clear evidence that Japanese companies were engaging in unfair trade practices that violated an agreement between Japan and the United States. We expect our trading partners to live up to their agreements. As I've often said, our commitment to free trade is also a commitment to fair trade. But in imposing these tariffs, we were just trying to deal with a particular problem, not begin a trade war. So next week...
And this is so important. So what Ronald Reagan is saying here is that there's a very particular reason for putting these tariffs on. I don't like doing it, and it sucks. And if you, essentially, the implication here is if you're just putting tariffs on for no particular reason, then you are damaging the economy. Then you're doing it for all the wrong reasons or for no reason at all. This is really super important because this is in direct opposition to what Donald Trump is doing, which is putting tariffs on literally everyone in the world to the minimum of 10%. And to the maximum of stupendous amounts. And then, this isn't a case of strategic tariff placement due to, well, actually, they did this unfair trade practices here and this and that. But unless you can argue that Trump kind of does, actually, to be fair to him. He kind of says, everyone's being unfair. This is all unfair. Oh, weird. So, everyone's taking advantage of the United States. He literally just thinks everyone's taking advantage of the United States. And that's not true. And when they're not taking advantage of the United States, that actually there's, because this is really to do with trade deficits and surpluses. When there's a trade surplus with another nation, then he still puts a 10% tariff on them. So even with nations who are not taking advantage of the United States, there's a minimum of 10%. And then he's like, well, come and do a trade deal with us then. That's not the case. And he's just using that to eke out as much more out of these nations who want to get rid of the 10% trade tariff. So that is unfair trade practices that the US is doing, which is bullying them to get more of what they want. So it's to the advantage of the United States. And here Trump is the one complaining that these people are taking advantage of us when he's the one that's using tariffs to get an advantage over them. So it's complete and utter hypocrisy. Anyway, let's take this back to just go through that part again.
We expect our trading partners to live up to their agreements. As I've often said, our commitment to free trade is also a commitment to fair trade. But you know, in imposing these tariffs, we were just trying to deal with a particular problem, not begin a trade war.
Particular problem, not begin a trade war. What Trump has done is begun a trade war and not looked at a particular problem. That's the difference between these two approaches.
So next week, I'll be giving Prime Minister Nakasone this same message. We want to continue to work cooperatively on trade problems and want very much to lift these trade restrictions as soon as evidence permits. We want to do this because we feel both Japan and the United States have an obligation to promote the prosperity and economic development that only free trade can bring. Now, that message of free trade is one I conveyed to Canada's leaders a few weeks ago, and it was warmly received there. Indeed, throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. Now, there are sound historical reasons for this. For those of us who lived through the Great Depression, the memory of the suffering it caused is deep and searing. And today, many economic analysts and historians argue that high tariff legislation passed back in that period, called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, greatly deepened the Depression and prevented economic recovery.
Now, what the problem is for Trump here is he's used the Smoot-Hawley tariffs as some great thing previously, whereas these arguably helped bring about the Great Depression. And so what Reagan is saying is directly against what Donald Trump is doing, which is across the board massive tariff agendas, are rather like Smoot-Hawley.
You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for...
And this is the main part of what the advert uses.
For a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity.
Which is essentially just a massive broadside against what Trump is doing right now. But what the Ontario advert did is take the core message from Reagan here and apply it to Trump now. And I don't think, even though he said, we have put tariffs on Japan here for this particular reason, in general, tariffs suck, and here's why they suck. And Ontario said, oh, that message you've got about here's why tariffs suck, that's what we're going to use back against Trump now. And then Trump comes along, and just like he did with the kind of CBS 60 Minutes interview, says, oh, you can't go editing this stuff and taking out particular elements of what he said. Therefore, that's fraud. Therefore, we're gonna sue you. Well, we can't sue you. We're just going to slap 10% tariffs on you and stop doing trade negotiations. And then Ontario's going, hang on, we're just using Ronald Reagan's words to make a really sensible point about the, extolling the virtues of free and fair trade.
Now, it hasn't always been easy. There are those in the Congress, just as there were back in the 30s, who want to go for the quick political advantage, who risk America's prosperity for the sake of a short-term appeal to some special interest group, who forget that more than 5 million American jobs are directly tied to the foreign export business and additional millions are tied to imports. Well, I've never forgotten those jobs, and on trade issues, by and large, we've done well. In certain select cases, like the Japanese semiconductors, we've taken steps to stop unfair practices against American products, but we've still maintained our basic long-term commitment to free trade and economic growth. So, with my meeting with Prime Minister Nakasone and the Venice Economic Summit coming up, it's terribly important not to restrict the President's options in such trade dealings with foreign governments. Unfortunately, some in the Congress are trying to do exactly that. I'll keep you informed on this dangerous legislation because it's just another form of protectionism, and I may need your help to stop it. Remember, America's jobs and growth are at stake. Until next week, thanks for listening, and God bless you.
You can't make a clearer argument against Trump's position, certainly from a revered American point of view, than that. So this source says, look, 1, Reagan's speech is real. 2, it's public domain. 3, Americans pay the cost of the added 10% tariffs, not Canadians. 4, Trump keeps lying because he thinks you're all too stupid to fact check. 5, the average family will pay an extra $4,900 this year because of his tariffs. And there you go. So, right, so this is Trump in his own words now. Hopefully, if we can get that working.
Cheated on a commercial. Ronald Reagan loved tariffs, and they said he didn't. And I guess it was.
So his claim here is Ronald Reagan loves tariffs, and they said he didn't. Ronald Reagan, you just heard Ronald Reagan speak there. It's not fake, it's not fraudulent, and he didn't like tariffs. He said, I had to use them in this particular situation. So this is a case of Donald Trump not doing his own research, right? Maybe he doesn't have time to go and look into this. He's got other people doing that. But the other people are feeding him misinformation or disinformation. Or he knows what Ronald Reagan said and he's lying. Like, none of this looks good for Donald Trump.
I don't know. They cheated on a commercial. Ronald Reagan loved tariffs, and they said he didn't. And I guess it was AI or something. They cheated badly.
I guess it was AI. So now he's throwing out something even more controversial, which is to say that Ontario manipulated the audio saying it was AI. And as you just saw there, it wasn't.
Canada got caught cheating on a commercial. Can you believe it?
They didn't. You are either lying or you are slandering Canada through willful ignorance. As I mentioned, you know, there are community notes all over the shop with these kind of claims. Ronald Reagan's statements praising free trade, as reported in the commercial broadcast in Ontario, are not generated by AI, as can be easily verified by the audio transcript provided by a reliable source, the Reagan Library. And there's a link to it there, and a full recording of the address as seen there, which we just saw through Twitter, but you can go and see it in a number of places. Now, this is all in the context of the worsening relationship between the United States and Canada. For literally no reason, says this source, we destroyed our image as Americans with one of our closest allies. Years of American soft power built up, only for Trump to obliterate in a few months with zero strategic reasoning behind it. So Ian Bremer here saying, staggering how much damage has been done to the US-Canada relationship in Trump's first year. So the question here, from an overall point of view, how do you think the Canadian government should approach each of the following regions, countries, or economies? So this is asked to Canadians. So is each of these entities an enemy or potential threat? That's a dark red. Pink is we should approach them cautiously. Dark blue is on friendly terms, and gray is not sure, don't know. So the countries that the Canadians see as the enemy or a potential threat, most are, well, not Australia, not the UK, not New Zealand, not Japan. Let's go all the way down to the bottom here. India, 24% and 35%. So that's basically 59%, not looking good. Now, India has a very fractious relationship with the United States, with Canada, for all sorts of reasons that I'm not going to go into now. China, 34% and 37%, which added together makes 71%. Okay, so China not seen very well in the United States, 71%. And then we've got 70% for the United States. But the United States has the dark red patch here, enemy or potential threat, as a much bigger percentage than the other nations. So actually, this is far worse, I would argue. 46% of Canadians see the United States as an enemy or a potential threat, with 24% seeing them cautiously. Only 27% see them friendly as an ally. Those would probably be the Albertans, right? So really, really problematic data there coming from Canada. The United States has made Canadians think the US is an enemy. Donald Trump, and his administration has made Canadians think that the US is an enemy. Absolutely insane. Now, I want to just point this out as well, because it's not only the context of Canada that sees Donald Trump lie about everything. The Truth Social post I'm going to read you now is really analogous to the Canadian Truth Social posts that we have seen already. So here, Carl Cheney says, look, Trump says Merrick Garland, he's a previous attorney general under the Biden administration, Lisa Monaco and Jack Smith. So Jack Smith was one of the attorneys who was leading an investigation into Donald Trump and had a court case that then, because it hadn't finished by the time Trump came in, it got thrown out, blah, blah, blah. So he said these three rigged the 2020 election while he was president, and none of them were in power. They also managed to tape lawmakers' calls before the Biden administration began. Quite clearly, none of that happened. What you're just about to read is an impossible claim from Donald Trump. These three people apparently rigged the 2020 election, and yet the 2020 election took place when Trump was in power. Trump was in power from 2016 to 2020, right? These people could not have rigged the election. They were not in power. You were in power. Do you not understand this? So anyway, Donald Trump says, just in, documents show conclusively that Christopher Wray, deranged Jack Smith, Merrick Garland, Lisa Monaco, and other crooked lowlifes from the failed Biden administration signed off on Operation Arctic Frost. They spied on senators and congressmen and congresswomen and even taped their calls. They cheated and rigged the 2020 presidential election. These radical left lunatics should be prosecuted for their illegal and highly unethical behavior. You're like, what are you talking about? What do you mean they cheated and rigged the 2020 presidential election from not being in power whatsoever, not being in a position to remotely be able to do that because you were in power? Like, what? But again, this is just so similar to what you just saw with these comments about Canada, which is like these Ronald Reagan this Ronald Reagan advert is fraudulent and fake, and then he speaks about it, says, well, it must have been done by AI, etc., etc., etc. You're like, no, it didn't happen. It wasn't put together by some AI model. This is what he said. Stop lying to us. You keep lying to us, and for some reason Fox News isn't hanging you out to dry. There's so much money involved in the Donald Trump regime that his propaganda outlet, Fox News, has just completely genuflected to their dear leader and said, we will say anything you want us to say. We will never go against you, our dear leader. Absolutely incredible. Now, all of this kind of behavior, I think, is having an effect. Those two incidents there, just, those two subject matters are, I think, they give us a window into Donald Trump's head. That's a crazy place to look into. Just in general, across all policy domains, Donald Trump is in trouble. And I think he's basically kept afloat by Fox News essentially disinforming their audience to the point that most of their audience still don't recognize the damage that Donald Trump is doing.
Because of more expensive fuel and tariff-impacted goods. So let's take a little look at this with Harry Anton to run the numbers on how Americans feel about A little check-in on how Donald Trump is handling the economy so far. How's he doing?
Yeah, my mama was a doctor, and I think she'd look at these numbers and say that Donald Trump's doing absolutely awful in the minds of the American people. What are we talking about? We're talking about new lows for Donald Trump. He's hit new lows for himself. Trump's economic net approval rating hits lows with these pollsters. CNBC, look at this. Down now, minus 13 points in the net approval rating on the economy. You come to this side of the screen, it's minus 19 points among Quinnipiac. And keep in mind, we're talking
technically negative 19, minus we generally only use for temperatures. All pernickety.
Talking about hitting record lows for Donald Trump in either his first term, which of course ended back in 2021, or his second term, which is ongoing right now. The bottom line is Donald Trump is at the lowest point ever in either of his terms.
But compare it to presidents historically.
Yeah, let's take a look at this. Donald Trump is beating himself in the way you don't want to beat yourself, record lows, but let's compare it to other presidents. Well, let's take a look here. Okay, worst economic net approval ratings at this point among presidents since 1977. In the presidency, right, this is a new Donald Trump presidency. Look at this. He's the worst for any presidency at this point. How about the second term? Come to this side of the screen. Of course, Trump's in his second term. He's the worst for any president at their second term at this point. So Donald Trump isn't just beating himself with record lows. This is the lowest for any president ever at this point in either a presidency or for a second term. Donald Trump setting the types of records you simply put do not want to set.
And yet, you know, he's still able to get things done. He's still bypassing Congress. He's doing things unilaterally, and he's gerrymandering districts. But even as terrible as the gerrymandering it is, and as much as they're going to steal a whole host of seats as a result of changing the district maps, at this rate, and with the generic ballots as they are, which are looking really bad, you're going to get a massive blue wave in the November elections. So I'm really worried about the November elections because they're going to be looking at that data, and they're going to be realizing that even with gerrymandering, they are going to lose control of the House of Representatives. And if that's the case, you're more likely to see Donald Trump do things even, or his administration do things even more explicitly to undermine the free and fair elections in the United States. So I'm super worried about that. But in general, like the insanity of Donald Trump creating these tariffs and exacerbating an already existing trade war against a neighbor allied state over lies that he himself is peddling is just super dangerous. And it's super dangerous to also consider, it's not dangerous to consider. I mean, if one considers that he's being disinformed by people around him, that his administration, his whether it be Stephen Miller or whoever it is around him that is whispering sweet nothings in his ear, like that is really worrying, because he is able to be so easily poisoned and manipulated by people around him, because he clearly doesn't know that, if we take his word for it, like, you know, that he thinks it's AI and fake and fraudulent, then he doesn't know the truth. Why doesn't he know the truth when he should have the very best aides and researchers around him in the world? And the most sensible answer to that question is he doesn't know the truth because they don't want him to know the truth, which then leads us to believe that Trump really isn't making the decisions about tariffs on China. He's just doing the bidding of the people around him, and the people around him are running the administration. This administration is a Project 2025 administration, and Donald Trump is merely a mouthpiece for these far more nefarious people around him. That's a concern. Anyway, appreciate your support. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.